Hey Nerf Herders, I'm Addy Thomas.
And I'm Ben Milton.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Certain Point of View. It's our exploration into the Star Wars galaxy. We're taking a further dive into the comics. We're catching up so that week to week as new comics come out, we'll have that for you. And of course, we'll discuss Star Wars news as it comes out and any other content as they're released. And we'll continue to take this deep dive into the Star Wars galaxy. Before we get there, I do want to let you know that you can find all of the podcasts that are part of Certain Point of View on our website. You can find Another Pass with Case Aiken, The Scruffy Nerf Herders, a Star Wars D20 story. We've also got Fun and Games with Matt and Jeff. All of that is on our website, certainpov.com. And also, while you're there, I'd also like to mention that we have a supporter on our show now, actually. My insurance agent, Maria Monzon, has actually decided to help us out a little bit as we kind of reach out and try to find more people who'd like to be part of the Certain Point of View community. And she is an amazing person that I've worked with, not just with my car insurance, but renter's insurance, business insurance, all sorts of stuff. She's one of the easiest people to deal with that I've ever had to work with, and just is such a reassurance for me, especially in the insurance world. Because, Ben, I think it's one of those things where it's just like, insurance is one of those things like banking and, mortgages and my investments where I just kind of draw a blank with a lot of those things. And so it helps to have a guide.
Yeah, it's so important to have a good person doing all those different things that you're just not an expert in. And if you're not comfortable with it, then, you got to find the right person, and that's what you did.
Yeah, and someone you can absolutely trust. That's really important, too. And someone who got a great deal for me. She can help you out, too. In fact, you can find all of her contact information on our website. If you go to, I believe, if you go to
certainpointofview.com/support. Yep.
And you'll find her contact information there. Again, that's on our website, certainpov.com. Before we get to the actual content of today's episode, Ben, I have been having lots of sleep issues lately. You're familiar with my sleep history and breathing issues and all that fun stuff. And right now we're getting close to a new World of Warcraft expansion. And you turned me on to a great podcast, Lore Watch, from Blizzard Watch. And they just delve deep into all the World of Warcraft and some other Blizzard lore as well. In fact, I've listened to some of their Overwatch episodes as well. But they go really deep with World of Warcraft, since that's the bulk of Blizzard's work in terms of lore.
Right.
And I've been on a constant stream. I'm listening to these episodes at 1.5 times speed so that I can just go through them. I'm like 40 episodes in right now. And I was listening to an episode, and they recommended reading the World of Warcraft pre-Legion expansion comic on Anduin Wrynn called Son of the Wolf. And there's especially because of the last page. And I thought that was really interesting because I think it says a lot about the direction of the game and where it could go in the future.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think we'll talk a lot about some of this lore on the on a special episode for just our patrons.
Okay, awesome.
But I will say that I've gotten so into it. I was having trouble falling asleep and half reading this comic while I was falling asleep last night.
Yeah.
I suddenly woke up and realized I was talking to myself, but in my head, I was talking. I don't know if we were recording in my head if we were recording a podcast or if we were talking on Discord, but you were there and J Mike were there in my head. I could hear you guys talking. I could hear J Mike's dumb laugh, about I heard him say boo, the way he regularly says, it says boo. Yeah. When there's an idea he's not crazy about. But I swear, like, either this says so much about my obsession with podcasting and my obsession with this game that I was asking you what you thought about this comic and the last page of the comic and what it means. And when I didn't hear you respond, I got worried. And I sat up in my bed. I was like, oh my God, I'm a mess.
Whoa, buddy, you're hallucinating. This isn't good.
No, but it's somewhat comforting that I'm hallucinating about podcasting and not like other delusions of grandeur or like more violent issues.
And I'm glad that you weren't tweeting at like 3 a.m. instead. Yeah. That's good too.
Right.
So
because in 10 years I'd have to worry about those tweets probably.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. You definitely will. You definitely will. That and this podcast. I do have thoughts about that last page of that comic book. I will save them for the very special episode of Patreon that we're going to do for our patrons. But yeah, that page is really interesting, and Chris Metzen, who used to be sort of the brains and the guiding force behind the Warcraft story, put out an interview this week, and he was talking about just how long into the future and how far into the future Blizzard and other game companies too, but in this case really Blizzard is driving their ship, much in the same way that Star Wars is now and the way that Marvel has been for the last decade. They've got a course set, and they're putting pieces in place as they go along the way to make that course happen, and it's fascinating. I'm caught up with that. I binged that show, like straight through within like a couple weeks.
Yeah.
And I did it on regular speed. I didn't even speed it up. I just went at it, and yeah, it was 80 some episodes, and I'm just like, okay, that's a lot of lore. But I'm totally into it. I was so into it. You bought me the Warcraft Chronicle books, all 3 of them. I've plowed through those, and I listened to that entire podcast series. So yeah,
I'm just so happy that you've gotten into the World of Warcraft lore. I know this is a Star Wars podcast, but I love that we like have sort of this appreciation for seeing what these franchises are able to do, especially like I think that's one thing that makes the Star Wars franchise as appealing as it is right now, the Marvel franchise and WoW and what Blizzard is doing, because they've got a pretty good structured vision going forward and enough flexibility to adjust on certain choices as they go. But like they've got that, I think, flexibility isn't the right word, but agility. I've heard someone describe Marvel's system as agile enough to be able to make certain types of adjustments as they go. The overall vision is very clear, but they've figured out how to work with these different creators to really kind of bring it out. I think that's part of Marvel's system and how they've matured, and I think Star Wars is getting to that point as they kind of figure out what steps they can make and what steps they can't make.
Yeah, and both of them being under the Disney umbrella really helps that process, because you can communicate. You have like a common bond of communication where you can say, hey, what's working for you guys, how do you do that, and how can we tweak that system for what we want to do. Like, they're not going to just copy and paste what's working for Marvel into Star Wars. It's a different IP. There's different considerations and stuff like that. There's not comic books per se, even though we're going to talk a lot about comics today. That's not the driving force of Star Wars, whereas it's the driving force of Marvel. Toy sales are going to be a bigger deal than what they're selling in comics. You know what I mean?
Right.
So but the thought process of why they're doing things the way they're doing and how they have it all mapped out and the brains behind it and how they organize all that can be adjusted and worked on. And I think that's what we're seeing Lucasfilm do, since they've been bought by Disney.
Absolutely. So we'll get it right into what we were planning to talk about. Since we're in this sort of project of catching up on all the Star Wars comics, we're pulling them all together. I went through and bought like every Star Wars comic I could find that we haven't read yet. And I have it on my Comixology account, and we've just kind of planned a course for like, okay, let's systematically go through this. And we'd love for you guys to read along with us. Right now, we're going through the Poe Dameron comics. We just started them. We're going to talk about Volume 1, which is like the first like 5-6 issues of his series. And it takes place just before, it's part of the events leading up to Force Awakens. So it's let's get right into it. Ben, what are sort of your general thoughts for these for the first volume of the series?
This really rounded, like breathe some life into Poe Dameron that he didn't have in The Force Awakens, and he started to get for me in The Last Jedi. I still don't think he's a fully realized character. I thought he didn't have an arc at all in the first one, and I thought he had an arc in the second one, but I don't think it was fully realized yet. This really helped kind of fill in some of those gaps for his character, and made him far more interesting to me. Made his decisions, I think, like for people who were upset about how he behaved and how he was treated,
this is a good comic for those people.
This is a good comic book for those people, yeah, who are he's awesome, he's the best pilot in the galaxy, you should talk to him and stuff like that. Read this and see if you still feel that way at the end of this series. I have a feeling that it's going to add a lot more nuance to the character and make him a lot more complicated, which is what he needs, really. And that's exactly what these series seem to be doing, which is just like coloring in the lines to kind of flesh out these characters that are, they just don't have the time to do that in a big budget summer blockbuster.
Absolutely. And I one of the things that's one of the first things that drew me into Star Wars was the the starfighters, X-wings and A-wings versus TIE fighters, like those dogfights, the space dogfights was one of the first things I fell in love with when it came to Star Wars. So I'm all about this one. There's a little bit more intrigue with this series. What I also like, and this is a common complaint I've heard from Star Wars fans about the Disney sequels, and that's they don't really understand sort of the bigger political picture and sort of the structure of the First Order and the Resistance and the New Republic. Because it's important to make that distinction. The New Republic and the Resistance are two separate entities, and I don't. Exactly. Officially, they're two separate.
Officially, they're just they're shoveling money. Some people in the New Republic are shoveling money to the Resistance to stop the First Order.
Right. But everything is kind of. It's off the books because Leia is no longer welcome in the New Republic as well, and that's actually in one of the books. Because they've publicized her connection to her relation to Vader as well. But that's they've been, like you said, the coloring in the lines, that's happening in a lot of this extended media, which I think just makes sense because it's hard to do a lot of that stuff in a movie without slowing it down and adding votes of no confidence and some of the stuff that really bogged down the prequels that is kind of important world building, but for the sake of a blockbuster movie is maybe not the best choice within those movies. So we were just talking about World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft has had to handle this problem too, where they have sometimes really big events happening outside of their game world, and that's been frustrating for me personally, because I'm like, if I'm going to play this game, I want to see the story of the game play out in the game, right?
But they've had.
But like bringing that exact example up, and I've heard a couple different people I've heard talk about that, that you want some nuance with your characters, but you have basically this small novel which gets into someone's introspection and thought, like inner monologues, and like that doesn't work in a game. So it's are you going to have a 10-minute cutscene where you're watching someone just kind of talk, have deliver an inner monologue in game? So I think there are a lot of challenges to building this kind of universe with such depth and limiting yourself to one medium. And I think the moment you expand out to a multimedia type of storytelling franchise, there's going to be some sacrifices, unfortunately, for some of the more commonly accessed media, like the movies for Star Wars are the big thing. That's their bread and butter. The TV shows are going to be secondary. And then, you have the comics and then the books and, any other media out there, any games, whatever else, kind of all that kind of starts falling in depending on what you have time to access, for that matter, or interest to access. So
the question becomes in that scenario, which is like, how how necessary do you make those ancillary things? Like for Star Wars, the movies are their core base. Like that's the number one thing, right?
Yeah.
How do you walk that line between, it just didn't make a great movie to put that information in there, or if you didn't read that book or that comic book or see that short film, whatever, you didn't really truly grasp what was happening in the experience.
So here's the thing. So I've been on and off with comics. I haven't read much in terms of the books, but with Star Wars, I have watched Rebels. Like really, Rebels and Clone Wars is really the extent of my exploration into the extended universe with Star Wars. I don't feel I've missed out on anything while watching the movies. But, I do think that the tone that's established by these the TV shows, these animated shows from Dave Filoni, have added to the overall picture in a way where I don't think you can quantify, well, this is essential storytelling, because I don't think it is essential storytelling. Like, I don't feel there's anything in The Last Jedi that I, as someone who loved it, and opposed to someone who absolutely despises the movie, I don't think there's anything that they could have seen in Rebels or in Clone Wars that would have suddenly opened them up to that experience. Possibly, except what's hard to so there's a lot of I'm not. This is sort of not really fully formed thoughts here, but
yeah,
but the idea that of what the nature of the Force that's kind of explored in Rebels and in Clone Wars, I do think sets up better, at least prepares me better for the story that I was going to see in The Last Jedi. Since that's the most controversial story right now.
Right.
So, which is why I'm focusing in on
I love
that
that you said right now.
Yeah.
Oh, God. Where are we going, Addy?
I know. Let's wait till episode 9, man. Star Wars fans hating Star Wars since Ewoks. Star Wars fans have been hating Star Wars since 1983.
Yeah. Thanks, Empire Strikes Back. Darth Vader can't be Luke's father. That's ridiculous. I remember it. Yeah, I don't know. I would kind of say that Clone Wars is required watching to make the prequels good.
Yeah, but that...
They say, it's not that they make them good, is that they really...
They color in the lines in a really great way.
Really, yeah, where it really does help tremendously.
Yeah, and that one, I think that's because there's certain character moments that didn't deliver for most of the audience. What I think I have a tough time... I don't think it was an issue so much with... Well, it is an issue with preconceptions, ultimately, because we had a certain vision of what Star Wars is based on the original trilogy. So then experiencing the prequels, we didn't get that. But there wasn't any existing media before that to prepare us for that. Whereas The Last Jedi... you kind of have to, what I have a problem with, and this was supposed to be a Last Jedi prequel interpretation, but it's inevitable to have that discussion when it comes to Star Wars, no matter what you're talking about in the Star Wars universe at this point.
Right. It always comes back to this right now.
But here's the thing, I think the question is, there's a number of questions. For me, my interpretation of how the last fight in Return of the Jedi goes, and your interpretation of what happens in those final moments with Luke and Vader and the Emperor does affect who your perception of who Luke Skywalker is in a big way. The other thing is, and this is what I have a hard time with, if you watch the trailers for The Last Jedi, I honestly don't, and you didn't like the movie because of what they did with Luke, I don't know what honestly you were watching when you saw Luke say the Jedi Order has to end. I don't know what you were thinking when in those years between the 2 years between Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, and the last thing we knew about Luke is that he left. He didn't have contact with Leia. That he had secluded himself on this island, and Rey had just found him. What did you think Luke was doing in all that time? Did you think he had not like, did you think he was like preparing himself for a fight, or did you think like I had assumed he had run away and like they already
that's
said
what we're told he does. Yeah,
and that's what Han says. I mean, because of the failure with the Jedi Academy.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think a lot of people were thinking he was getting ready for something or preparing himself for something or doing like a Rocky montage until somebody got him a ship to come back, or I think that's what people wanted, you know. And you're right, it is expectations, and you know, it's hard. There is a fine line between meeting expectations and subverting expectations. You can do one or the other too much. If you meet expectations too much, it's fan service and it's dumb. Right. If you subvert too much of the expectation, you just took a giant dump on an entire fandom.
Right.
And I think in the first movie, a lot of people felt like JJ went too far with servicing, and I think in the second movie, people felt that Ryan went too far with subverting.
Yeah. Which, by the way, I kind of want to wrap up the Last Jedi Force Awakens discussion for this episode at least. But right. I do want to say there are two great videos from a particular, I don't remember the name of the channel, but the name of the series is called Movies with Mikey, and I have been addicted to this series on YouTube. I think I sent you the ones. He does a video for The Force Awakens, and he does one for The Last Jedi, and he does two videos for how we see Star Wars, and they are amazing. Like because I love The Force Awakens. My thought after The Force Awakens is, sure, yes, there's lots of nods to New Hope. Yes, there's a little bit of a remix of what we saw in the original trilogy, but the reason for that was like this wasn't the movie to start subverting expectations. This was the movie to reset expectations for what this franchise is. You know, that's what the Phantom Menace had to do with the prequels, and unfortunately it wasn't a direction we wanted to go in. And for many people, these sequels aren't where
lots of people who love. Well, I know a lot of people who love the prequels.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. There are people who love the prequels too, and I'm not taking that away from them. I don't. I like. There's a lot I do like in Revenge of the Sith, and there are definitely aspects of both Phantom Menace. I've come to appreciate Phantom Menace more as time's gone on.
All three movies have great moments for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And which is great. I mean, that's more than I get out of a lot of movies.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just love this universe and I love this lore so much. So it's hard to. I think I'm the more optimistic person. It's a little harder for you to disappoint me now. So since I'm just like searching for good, because I loved Canto Bight right from the beginning. But going back to Force Awakens, I think I had fallen. Just by hearing everyone talk about, it's a remix of A New Hope. It's a remix of A New Hope. I kind of got annoyed with that over time, but I think I kind of fell into that thought process after so many people kept on saying it. But I mean, I was a defender of that movie, for a very long time. And the only thing I wanted out of Last Jedi was subverting expectations, and I got that. So my expectations framed it properly. I was ready.
You were the perfect mark for that movie.
Exactly. Yeah, Rian Johnson. I mean, there's everything I've seen.
In a lot of ways, though, I don't think that's true either, because for what you were saying earlier about like what did you see in the trailer that made you think anything other than what we had been told? They set everything up to be like that was really the only realistic. I've yet to hear an alternate story that somebody has pitched where I'm like, yeah, that's a better idea than what we saw. That makes more sense.
Yeah.
So enough of Ryan Johnson's cock. Let's get back to Poe Dameron.
Yes. Yeah, so this Poe Dameron series, I'd actually read some of these particular issues before, so it was nice refreshing myself on this and going through the series. I really like that it paints this image of the political image of the Resistance and the New Republic and the First Order, and that they're at this position where they can't declare war on each other, so they're very cautious with starting up the conflict because both sides are definitely not ready to go to war with each other. And I think that provides a really very interesting picture that we haven't seen in the Star Wars universe yet. You know, this sort of stalemate, this idea of like, a war is coming, but we got to do everything we can right now to just keep on preparing, try to get a leg up on each other, and hope to God that they can win. And it's such a fascinating villain as well for this series. Agent Terex is sort of a really interesting character, getting to sort of like a spy versus spy kind of thing here with Poe Dameron. Even though he's a hotshot pilot, he's having to be a spy is sort of a very, very interesting development. Well, what do you think about the nature of the story?
There's a moment that really strikes me going back to The Last Jedi with you get a scene where it's right at the very beginning where Leia has summoned Poe and is basically giving him his marching orders of what she needs him to do, and basically puts together Black Squadron, which is his squad, and you do get that you finally get that scene where she's confiding in him and telling him what the plan is and stuff like that, so that his level of expectation is there for The Last Jedi of like, of course somebody's going to clue me into what's happening. That's how it always works when he was with Leia, he was in the inner circle. So when he gets pushed to the outside by disappointing Leia, and then she gets hurt and injured and isn't in command anymore, and so he's got to deal with a new set of leadership, he struggles. And I thought that like that initial scene right there just explained that whole interaction in the movie really, really well for me. And that's kind of what I was saying of like, how important is it for you to go back and read this stuff to help put everything in context? That's I don't know.
I don't think it is, but I do think it help. I don't think it's important, but I do think it helps. I think another thing that's sort of an interesting dynamic that we see here is Black Squadron and all the members of it are people who, some of them are people who were veterans of the rebellion, but then you also have people who are like sons and daughters of people who fought in the rebellion, and just sort of this generational, like you get more of a sense of time passing, even more. Like I think the movies did a fine job with it, but I know I've seen people complain about that. They're like, oh my God, well they just got rid of the Empire, so I guess we got to get the First Order, which is like a new version of the Empire, but not
Empire
as awesome.
Empire 2.0.
Yeah. I can't jump into Volume 2 for this one, but they continue to do a little bit more building on how this dynamic works, and sort of the people who are part of this universe post, like in this world in the decades after the rebellion. And I think it's a very fascinating picture of that. I think the other thing that's really cool that we get in this series is we get two stories as part of this volume. The first story we deal with, basically this is the main mission guiding the series so far is Leia is sending Poe to find Lor San Tekka. And Lor San Tekka is the guy at the very beginning of The Force Awakens. He's the archaeologist / sort of religious traveler that has the map to Luke Skywalker. He's the guy who gives the map to Luke Skywalker to Poe. Because right now Leia is about, we got to find Luke because I need his help in this fight. That's a big part of what drives The Force Awakens. So in a very similar way, this is sort of helping set that point up right now. So I love that. So we get Poe, on his first adventure. He's like going to the last known location for this explorer archaeologist guy, Lor San Tekka, and he finds this interesting sort of cult, the cult of the egg, basically, or the cult of the creche, if you prefer. And I love like one of the things that I love about what Dave Filoni has done in the Star Wars universe is adding new worlds and cultures and different religions as well, and sort of the different ideas of spirituality. But I love that we get basically this little cult religion that worships an egg and have been worshiping an egg for we don't know how long and how many generations have been down there, but it looks like they've been there for quite some time.
I'm glad that you brought the cult up, because that to me was the most interesting part of this story. Because you have like sort of like this doomsday cult almost, like they're holding on in the belief that this being is going to hatch out of this egg and save them and the universe, and like they're completely devoted to this, and they've spent their lives hiding this secret, and like you said, who knows how many generations. And we both come from a religious background of not like cult like experience, but like that fervor of like that grew out of a cult like experience.
Yes, yeah, very much.
And I found this to be completely fascinating to me, of like how just like our former churches or where we grew up, where how that grew out of a huge disappointment. This also has a huge disappointment for them.
I'm just a little disappointed, though, that our past church experiences didn't involve two, like, basically kaiju emerging from an egg on a Saturday service to fight each other, because apparently they're going to come and save the universe. What I want to know is, what is, like, of course, like, there's no follow-up to this, because it ends up helping save Poe, spoiler, and allows them to escape the situation with the Empire. And then, you have this good sort of, like, well, not the Empire, the First Order security guy, Agent Terex.
See, even you can't tell the difference, Addy.
Yeah, I know, they're all the same, whatever. I mean, yes, we know the First Order is Empire 2.0. That's the point of it.
Yeah.
The expectations don't get subverted until later, and we'll see if that delivers in episode 9. But anyway, back to this. I'm a little disappointed we've never gotten a Saturday service or a Sunday service where
I'd
kaiju
still be
fight
tithing.
out. Yeah,
I'd still be tithing if that were the case.
Right. Now, what I want to know is, like, because this is fortuitously timed for them to escape and to move on to sort of the next stage of the story. But like these kaiju just kind of keep on going fighting and leave. Like, this religion believes that they'll help save the universe or save the world or whatever. Like, will we ever see these guys again?
I don't think so. No,
Yeah.
but because here's in my head canon how it works is that they balance each other, like they obviously like the black and the white, and kind of like how all things that we're exposed to with the Force seem to like have a balance aspect to them, so that like Snoke says, like when light rises to meet the darkness. That I think that's like that was just another example of the Force manifesting itself, and people putting their own meaning to it and their own, baggage for lack of a
sort of
better
a
word.
Microcosm of balance, right? Like just to in that area of space.
Yeah,
like that.
and they'll probably like fight for a while, and then like in that process, another egg will be formed, or they'll go back into the egg once balance is achieved.
Because I assume this would be a huge disappointment if whatever that threat is from the unknown regions that Thrawn is concerned about, the Emperor is concerned about,
It's those two kaiju.
Guys.
Just rampaging through the universe would be hilarious. That would be funny. That would make a great fan film.
And then we have the second stage of this particular volume, which is actually the part I like the most, even though like I like the religious aspect of this first part of it. But the second part of it was sort of going a prison break for a Hutt, for Gracchus the Hutt, who has the next piece of information, because he was the next person that Lor San Tekka visited, and he has the next piece of information of the possible places he goes to next. And Gracchus is on this very cool concept for a prison. And actually, I think Star Wars has had some pretty cool concepts for prisons, because in the main Star Wars comic, which we'll get to eventually, there's this prison that's basically like on the surface of a sun. So like there's like it's very tough to escape and everything. You know, it's the structure for it is very, it has to be like the integrity of it has to be ridiculous. So it's really sort of a cool location. This one is basically like there's no real rule of law with this one. You have basically a certain area of a planet that has, and this planet has such high gravity that it would basically kill you. But they have a zone that is powered and has sort of a normal area of gravity for all the prisoners to go. But it's just a town, and it is lawless, so they can sometimes get stuff smuggled to them. They have weapons. You know, they have different mob leaders. Like, it seems like there are 3 major leaders, including Gracchus the Hutt, all vying for power in this prison. And you've got this very corrupt prison warden who betrays Poe and his crew. And Agent Terex is already down there to meet him. And Gracchus basically says he'll give the information to either Agent Terex or to Poe, whoever is able to successfully break him out of that prison. And it's such a fun concept to go with.
It is great. It actually is there's a real prison like that in South America. I forget which country it is, but it's there are no cops or there's no security. It's just nothing but criminals in the prison, and they just kind of govern themselves there. And there's a documentary about it, and it's both fascinating and horrifying at the same time, because in some ways, like it's sort of rehabilitative in the fact that like they all have to work with each other and figure it out, and so you kind of like these really hardened criminals like end up like having to figure out like, all right, well, like how are we going to eat, and how, like, you know, and having to start thinking about society and not just themselves.
Right.
Now we don't get that in this comic book. We don't get that in this comic book. Yeah, there's murders all the time, but as long as it doesn't interfere with like getting stuff done and keeping everybody healthy and safe in the compound. In this story, everybody is a monster. Gracchus is probably the most reasonable being on that planet.
Yes. And
he's completely insane. I love the Hutts. Anytime the Hutts get involved in stories now, I'm super excited.
Yeah. And these Hutts are also fun because they got robotic legs.
Yeah.
It's like they took a cue from Darth Maul.
Yes. They're like, hey, you know what? That worked.
Yeah.
Let's adjust that. Yeah, because being a slug, I guess it would be kind of hard to move around. So, and they usually have like people carting them around. So this is just the next step of that, I suppose.
Right.
I thought it was a fun, like, this has just been a fun story, right? Like this whole run of comics is just fun. Like you're getting story and you're getting things colored in that are like being forecast down the road to the movies, but it's fun reading all along the way. I like this run of comics. Like it's super enjoyable. It's a lot of fun.
Absolutely. The other thing I'll add to that is I also like the impression that they give. Like you start to get a sense that Agent Terex sort of has an interesting backstory that they've kind of hinted at right at this point. They haven't really explored it yet, but he's someone to fear in the galaxy on his own merit. You're not sure why. He was formerly associated with the Empire, and he sort of has some disdain for the First Order, but he's working with them because he seems committed to their ideals for some reason. But even out in the underworld, people fear him and respect him. And so it's sort of an interesting, like, it looks like we'll find out more about it, but he's resourceful, he's cutthroat, he'll make a deal with someone and then turn on them very easily. So he's a really good villain. He's a really fun villain for them to play with, and really good counter, really good contrast to Poe, who is, fly by the seat of his pants type of hero. So having that methodical villain is definitely a good counter for a character like that. So I think that's also another really fun part of the story. So here's sort of one thing that kind of takes me out of the moment a lot. So part of Black Squadron, are a couple characters who were basically cameos in The Force Awakens. So even though like these characters have names, every time I see Snap Wexley, I don't see Snap Wexley, I see Greg Grunberg. Every time I see Jess Pava, I see Jessica Hedwig, who's also Colleen Wing in Iron Fist. So I automatically see them, and for a moment it just kind of takes me out. They work, their characters work, but for a moment I'm like, oh, that's not Snap Wexley, that's Greg Grunberg. Greg Grunberg.
Grunny.
Yeah, exactly. He was the pilot on Lost, and he was on Heroes. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's also it was cool because they drew him that way. You could tell it's like, oh, this is who the character is. Like they even made him look like Grunberg and stuff. And
which is cool.
Like, oh, that's nice. Yeah, that's really nice. I'm glad they're there.
I think that's one thing that's cool about the Star Wars universe is like these very minor characters who sometimes never get a line of dialogue even in a Star Wars movie have expansive Wikipedia pages because of the expanded universe. Yeah. And so it's cool that, we got some backstory on Snap Wexley in that, he was 16 when he fought in the Battle of Jakku, and he was, so he's someone who's seen a little bit of the universe.
He's been around. He's got some street cred.
Yeah. So this series makes me even more excited for Star Wars Resistance, for Dave Filoni's next series, since it's sort of the hotshot pilots. It's very inspired by like going with the sticking with the pilots and dogfighting. We're gonna get Captain Phasma in this series, and we're gonna get Poe in this series. So kind of, and I imagine because it's gonna be in the lead up to Force Awakens, that we'll get more of this dynamic of, okay, this sort of tense, armistice where they can't really fight each other, but they are sort of fighting around and doing the best they can.
There's little skirmishes here and there, yeah.
Exactly. So it's a really sort of interesting picture to draw. So that's about it that we've got for this episode for the Poe Dameron comic series. We'll do volume 2 probably next week, unless there's some major Star Wars news that pops, and we'll talk about that, of course. But we will continue reading this Poe Dameron comic series. It's coming up to wrap up in the next couple months, I believe. So we'll sort of try to catch up with that, and we'll probably move on to we'll move on to another series very soon, but we'll let you know what we're going to come up on. Of course, you can follow us on all of our social media by just going to our website, certainpov.com. While you're there, be sure to check out our Patreon if you'd like to be a part of what we do on this podcast and our other podcasts. All of that you can find on our website, certainpov.com. And until next time, stay scruffy, my nerf herders.